Greetings to everyone who has joined in today. My name is Kate Seeley, and I'm the Senior Vice President at the Middle East Institute. And I want to welcome you all to today's panel, Art, Sustainability, and the Changing Environment in the Middle East. This is the first of several conversations exploring our latest, very powerful exhibit organized in partnership with the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation. Curated by Maya El Khalil, the exhibit is titled Perceptible Rhythms, Alternative Temporalities, and it explores the impact of conflict, urbanization, and the climate crisis on environments in the Middle East. It opened on December 14th, 2022, and will be up through April 28th, 2023 at the MEI Art Gallery in the heart of Washington, DC. Please come visit and spread the word. You can learn more at mei.edu, where you can also find the exhibit online. We're very grateful to the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation and its founder, Ms. Hoda Al Khamis Kanu, for her support of this show and of this very important topic. The increasingly devastating impact of climate change does not get the global attention it deserves, and that is especially true in the Middle East, where so many other crises always seem to overshadow it. And this is why Maya's show is so important. It brings greater attention to the regional climate crisis. It encourages conversation and debate around what communities in the Middle East can do to address a diminishing environment. And it encourages artists to explore the topic of climate and sustainability with more urgency. And we hope that this show and shows like this can lead to more artistic practice on the topic of the environment to help raise greater public awareness. So a great thanks to Maya for leading on this topic, since this is one of several projects and shows she has curated with a focus on the environment. Now, some background on Maya. She is an independent curator and art advisor based in the UK. She was a founding director of the very influential Athar Gallery in Jeddah and has created many shows there and for the Arts Initiative 2139. She collaborates with international institutions with a focus on socially engaged exhibitions. And among them include the ongoing digital platform Take Me to the River, also about the environment, in collaboration with the Goethe Institute and the Prince Claus Fund. She also recently curated Portrait of a Nation 2, Beyond Narratives, sponsored by ADMA, which celebrated 50 years of art in the UAE. Maya, you are a curatorial powerhouse and an inspiration. Thank you again for your hard work on this show, and many thanks to the artists on this panel today, Sarah Al-Mahedi, Maha Nasrallah, and Philwa Nazar, for participating in the show and sharing your insights today. Now, a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Our moderator, Maya El Khalil, looks forward to taking audience questions through Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can all find on your screens. For those calling in by phone or watching our panel on the live stream, you can ask a question by emailing events@mei.edu. If you have any technical issues, please email events@mei.edu. Feel free to ask a question at any time throughout the conversation, and Maya will incorporate as many as possible in our limited time. So thank you all to our audience for joining again. And now, Maya, over to you.
Thank you, Kate, and a heartfelt thank you to Lynn Snage, Director of the Arts and Culture Center at the Middle East Institute, whose help has been instrumental throughout, and to the team at MEI and to ADMA, Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation, for their support of the exhibition. I feel particularly privileged for the opportunity to work with and show the artists who are participating in this exhibition. Now, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this panel discussion. I will start with a brief introduction about the exhibition, and then I will introduce our wonderful panelists who will present their work and contextualize it within their practice. We will start our discussion, and then we'll finish, as Kate said, with questions from the audience. Now, the exhibition, Perceptible Rhythms, Alternative Temporalities, seeks to find new ways to relate to and care for the environment in the face of a warming planet and its impact on nature and humanity. It includes the work of 12 artists from West and South Asia and North Africa. Climate change is bound to extractive, colonial, and industrial histories, without disregarding the violence done by projects that prioritize growth and extraction over people and environment. The exhibition chooses to tune into other temporalities and rhythms, that of the tree, the day's changing light, or the river's altered course. Now, each of the works in the exhibition strives to create new connections to land and space in the hope that it will entice us to fight for them. Of the artists we have with us today, it would be accurate to say that their practices and even the works we have included in the exhibition are not directly about the climate emergency. This tells us something about the context. And now Timothy Morton, the eco-philosopher, has called the climate crisis a hyper-object, something that is, and I'm quoting, massively distributed in time and space relative to humans, and therefore it's difficult to comprehend. The climate emergency and its effects are dispersed. They're not local in time or space, but its presence is felt everywhere. Many things, intentionally or not, are about it. And at the same time, nothing can really contain it. So today we will be considering the strategies of immediacy and remembering and their attention to relations of assimilation and or mimicry, and how such practices alter our relations to place. Now, there are two sides to assimilation. On the one hand, it creates affinity, understanding, and connection. And on the other hand, there's a melding of difference that could desensitize. All three artists are also attuned to micro adjustments and details, texture, shifting lights, changing bodies, and the immutable texture of memory, another strategy that we will consider in relation to communities and places. I will now introduce our panelists. Maha Nasrallah is an architect and an artist working between Lebanon and Canada. She has a private practice based in Beirut and has been teaching part-time at the School of Architecture at the American University of Beirut since 2003. She was awarded the Lebanese Architect Award for Sustainable Architecture in 2017. She was also awarded the first prize at the Age of Ceramics competition at Maqam, the Modern and Contemporary Art Museum in Alita, Lebanon. She participated in I Love You Urgently, the 2139 Jeddah Arts in 2020, the 33rd Salon d'Automne at Sursuk Museum in Beirut in 2018, the Clocks Are Striking 13 in Jeddah in 2018, amongst others. She is one of the co-founders of the Kerzei Pottery Workshop that began in 2011 in Ma'lin, Lebanon, an eco-friendly conservation project. She is currently living in Montreal, Canada. Filwa Nazir is based in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Having started her creative journey as a fashion designer, her current practice ranges from digital print, collage, textiles to appropriation of photography. Her work centers around questioning emotional and psychological identity in relation to spatial and social context, and the transition between the private and public spaces. Filwa's latest participations include the 16th Lyon Biennale of Contemporary Art in France in 2022, the Diriyah Biennale in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 2021, I Love You Urgently 2139 Jeddah Arts in 2020, and in between as part of the Marsh Project residency at Sharjah Art Foundation in 2019. Sara Al-Mehairi is an artist based in Abu Dhabi whose overarching body of work unfolds a discourse on themes of materiality, systems and interrelations, memory and language through the intuitive and poetic examination of narrative and abstraction. By engaging with geometric forms, he extracts and defines a structural language, read time and time again to suggest a form other than its own, a map, a sentence, a puzzle piece. The work we are currently showing at MEI was exhibited in her latest solo show, When the Ground Was, at Carbon 12 in Dubai. Her work has also been exhibited in the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation's 2022 exhibition, Portrait of a Nation to Beyond Narratives. She has also shown at the 2019 Youth Takeover Group show at Jameel Arts Center in Dubai, Tashkil's 2019 group exhibition play, the Culture Summit Abu Dhabi 2018. Maha, Filwa, and Sara, thank you so much for your time today. It's great to be finally able to discuss your participation in this exhibition together. Maha, would you like to start?
Thank you, Maya. Yeah, sure. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yes, yes, please.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. I think we can.
Okay. So this work is called Rebounds, and it's a personal diary in exile. It started with pages from my diary, my personal diary, where I was writing down my feelings after I had to flee from Lebanon to Canada. And eventually, I was saving the sheets of the dryer sheets that we use here instead of hanging the laundry in the sun. And I didn't know what to do with them until I realized I could actually stitch on them and rewrite this diary somehow in a storyboard. So as you see on the left, there's the actual pages of the diary with the text on the right that is taken directly from there and stitched on, and so on and so forth. This would be the view from the window where we live, and then on the right, it is the work that is done on the bounce sheet. Maya, do you want to ask me something? So because I wasn't expecting to share the work directly like that.
Oh, right. That's fine. The whole idea I thought is that each one of you present the work first, so that we can have that conversation all together afterwards. I don't. Is there anything? So to share the work within the practice, is there anything else, Maha, you want to share in general, or shall I move to?
I'd rather. Yeah, go
yes.
ahead. We will talk during the discussion, maybe.
All right.
Thank you,
problem.
Maya.
Okay. Filwa, would you like to just present a little bit briefly your work in the exhibition? And whatever you want to, within a broader context.
Okay, so maybe we can see a picture of In the Fold works. In the Fold is a textile installation that is basically it's inspired by sociologist Roger Caillois's research into ideas of mimicry and a state of psychosis that is called legendary psychasthenia. So he likens some kinds of instincts that are found in nature that use mimicry to defend itself to the psychotic who is unable to place himself in a certain position and space. So Caillois argues that mimicry has no defense or survival value. And while, you know, this state of psychasthenia is an extreme example of the relationship between body and space, it made me think of ideas in my society of assimilation and conformity. And to what extent do we try so hard to assimilate, you know, to the extent of a state of invisibility sometimes. So this work is in its aesthetic, in its lines, is inspired by certain insects that are found in Saudi Arabia that use mimicry, which are the blue-shinned grasshopper, and there's, I can't remember the name of the other insect, but yes, so they assimilate to the environment and they are found in the desert. And so I used material that kind of mimics the background in the gallery. So I used white cotton fabric, different types of cotton fabric. And I wanted, you know, to create a space where you kind of enter into this space like a cocoon and meditate on your state of self and meditate on you kind of on a way of connecting to your body in that moment. So this is what this work, this is how this work kind of explored ideas of mimicry, which is from a kind of a socio-psychological angle, actually.
Okay, thank you, Filwa. Sarah, also, I mean, a brief introduction on the work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on the panel today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just let me know if you guys can all see it. Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to introduce a few works that precede the actual work that's part of the exhibition now on, because all of them build up to one another and to give context to the work as well. So the work that is part of the show was part of my second solo show at Carbon 12 Gallery back in September of 2022. And in that exhibition, I had four series of works on paper. This is the first of one. It's called Shapes Are Like Thoughts. Over the past few years, I realized that my practice was surrounded and was about walking at the source of it. I would take a daily walk every day out of meditation, and that slowly became a practice of mine, looking, observing, and looking at these shifts that happen within the environment to our notice, and sometimes without to our notice as well. So this series in particular are embossings on paper, in which I would collect images of shadows and print them off paper. I know the images don't do it justice. This is also work that has to be seen in person, but I tried to get it as close to it as I can. Is it moving to the next slide? Okay, never mind. Okay, and
yes.
In the beginning of each series, I have a text accompanying it in the beginning. And so this text is also derived from language that I generate during these walks, and also post-walk reflections on what I've observed or what I felt, and honestly, just very naturally, all these things that I'm observing. So this one says, shapes are like thoughts, they change with the weather, sometimes they disappear. Thoughts are like shapes, they change the weather, sometimes I disappear. And to the right is a shadow of a flower tree. The second series is called No Day Without a Line, in which I was observing the environment. And when walking, I'm constantly looking down on the ground. And so also the idea of the grid is something that I play a lot with during my practice. And so I thought it would be interesting to bring that into the environment. Not everything is so linear, and I wanted to make sense of it. And I wanted to bring some order and control to place as well, in space that I was experiencing. So this is acrylic wash on paper. And moving on to the next slide, the text is also accompanying it. And to the right is just a closer look at one of the series. And through the series as well, you can start to see that towards the middle, I also have these embossings that come back. So whatever series that precedes the series that is currently showing, I would add on to it, because I want to also bring attention to the fact that we are constantly collecting information. It's not specifically at one perspective when we're walking or experiencing something. And so now I'm going to move on to the third series, which is what is currently showing on, and it's called Adjustments of the Daily. It's mostly made out of paper collage, but again, I have the print on paper, the text, acrylic wash on paper, and the embossings as well, to get a closer look at that. The text itself says, maintain alignment between the internal self and the external environment. Adjust the daily as needed. Changes in the environment that go unnoticed create continuity. We live diagonally. And to the right is one of the panels that a lot of people reacted to, specifically people that are from the capital of the United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, because these bricks are so reminiscent of pattern on the sidewalk. And I was looking specifically at patterns that would either change color, or that were had a specifically a layer of dust on them, or the fact that it's not a straight line when it's changing from one color to the next, or when did this decision be made in terms of trying to match a brick to the color that it originally was. And I just thought those were really interesting changes that were happening in the environment that often go unnoticed. And these are just also a few more from the series. And not all the panels that are shown are actually from the UAE. So I would also take images from all around the world. I would make it a thing where I would actually go on a walk, no matter where I was. It didn't matter what the location was, but instead creating an environment and space of your own. And yeah, that's basically me.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, Maha, and Filwa. So it's exactly what I've been talking about, that primarily it's like we are tuning into other temporalities and other rhythms. Now, the most immediate and apparent in the daily walk that Sarah, that gave rise to adjustments of the daily. Now, Sarah, as a poet and as an artist, was the drive to know your neighborhood in this way, was it an effort to actually overcome a sense of detachment or distraction, or what is the means to sharpen or test the capacity of your practice to render a familiar experience?
Yeah, that's really interesting because again, like as I was saying, it didn't really matter to me where I was walking, but it just brings a new layer when I go to the same place, because then we have this idea of, oh yeah, I've been here before, and what have I noticed previously, and I think it's really interesting that to actually detach yourself from what you may know, like you said, like I'm gonna get really abstract here, but like detaching from what I know the color red to be, or the circle shape to be, or dust to be, or whatever that, all these things that are preconceived notions, I'd like to go into the environment, no matter what location, with not knowing anything and seeing everything anew, which just allows me to sharpen like my image and on the environment, and also all the details that come with it, because we are selective when it comes to what we perceive. And so that's where your own perspective comes in as well.
It's also a form of archiving. Now, it's a specific form of archiving, which allows us to define the changing climate, to define it as an emergency. Now, often it is done by reference to sociological data or history or the movement of populations or scientific data. Now, Sarah and Maha, you are both contending with this more personal form of logging. Sarah with your daily attentive presence, and Maha to the patient assimilation of memories, which you refer to as a diary. Now, I want to ask you both about your archiving practices. What drives that compulsion? And what's the significance of daily recording?
Sarah, do you want to start? Yeah. Or me? Okay. Yeah. So basically, when after the August 4 blast in Beirut, we moved to Canada, and all of a sudden you are in a new environment, and I was feeling that my body was actually transported here, but somehow the rest of me hasn't. So I was feeling this separation between myself in a physical form, being in Canada, in Montreal, in this beautiful city, and the rest of me, the emotional self, which was not yet here somehow. And I had to work around this, and sometimes it was difficult. So I kept a diary. And in that diary, I would note all the feelings that came, and I would write down my impressions. And it felt like, you know, like a money, like, you know, the kids, they keep their money in a piggy. And it was like my thoughts were being stored in this piggy pot. And then I would feel like it's a therapeutical way to cope with the new environment. Yeah.
Just to add on to that,
Yes.
I always like my practice is a form of collecting anyways. If it's not within the work that is being shown currently, it's through my past work as well. And I feel like when I'm going on these walks, it's really important for me to always, like, yes, it is to see it from my perspective, but I think the interesting parts are when people start to connect with it. As mentioned previously, like there was a certain brick pattern that was in particular to Abu Dhabi sidewalks that people from Dubai perhaps did not recognize it, but people that were from Abu Dhabi were like, oh wow, like I know exactly where that is. And then there are patterns that people have never seen before. And so through this personal logging, you're able to also like connect through a community or through different themes as well. So yeah, collecting is super important to me because if we don't collect even physically, then at least for me, I also collect like with my body, our thoughts, our emotions, and so forth as well.
I think what's kind of interesting here is that for Sarah, you are familiarizing yourself with a place that is present but might otherwise be overlooked. Maha, it's almost like you're logging down, or you're remembering a place that is in a way inaccessible. I mean, not on a permanent basis, but currently. And there was this desire for attentiveness is the same. Filwa, we spoke about, maybe if you could speak a little bit about this relationship between the insect or the moth that inspired In the Fold and other forms of human dressing or transformation. What were these acts of observations that informed your work?
Well, as you know, some of my work, some of my other projects as well, you know that I come from a fashion design background.
Yeah.
So when I started creating these, these large textile installations, it started also with the idea of thinking of pattern making as a blueprint, as constructing something, and thinking of garments also as a spatial element that is a container of our emotions, of our states, our psychological states, our energetic dimensions. So that idea of thinking about my body as something I inhabit, something that is a place. It's my own first house and my last house. That idea made me think of architecture and made me think of construction, although I don't come from an architectural background. So, for this particular project that was the 2139 I Love You Urgently exhibition, I wanted to tap into these ideas and my themes of the relationship between body and space, but also to connect with the theme of environment, with the theme of sustainability, but from a kind of a social context. And so I thought of these theories of Roger Caillois, and I thought of these insects, and I did some research on the anatomies of these insects, and I was trying to find parallels between the anatomy and the lines of these insects and the lines of the pattern makings of traditional Saudi men and women clothing. So since I always use a construction deconstruction process in my work with pattern making technique, I just kind of dissect all parts of the traditional garment in this case, for example, and dissect the different parts of the anatomy of these insects and put them back together in a shape that I hope to convey the energy of what I'm trying to say, the emotion of what I want the impact of it to be. And then you would just hope that people kind of respond to this kind of energy.
Yes, Maha and Sarah and Filwa, whenever, I'd rather have this conversation very informal. So whenever you want to jump in and comment, please do so. I don't need to, so that I don't ask a question one after the other. I know it's very difficult when it's on a digital format, but as much as possible, if you can replicate the physical one, would be great. Maha, you reference in one of these small sheets, you reference the music of Fayrouz, and Fayrouz is a very famous Lebanese, an iconic actually Lebanese singer. For some reason, we all identify with in the diaspora as and you say specifically asking, did we build our culture around her folk songs? And there's a sense here of cultural identifications through shared experiences and shared references. Now, also in Filwa's work about mimicry and mutability and adaptation, there's also this idea, does this form of cultural identification allows for a community that can stand strong against the incursions of political neglect, or is it a way for the individual to cope?
Yeah, it's the question I think that many of us ask ourselves, like, is culture something that we construct, or is it something that is a given and that we continue to live through it, or that forms us? Do we form it? Does it form us? Or is it a constant, relationship between us trying to cope through this folk culture, or is it the other way around? And I think Fayrouz, as you said, is the iconic figure for that. And through all the huge quantity of her songs, we have every moment in our life can be referenced to a song of Fayrouz. And we can, like Filwa is deconstructing a little bit the garment, we can deconstruct our culture and rebuild it through her music, through her songs, and imagine that this is real and hope that this is real. Like the village that she draws for us is what we want it to be, but the reality is not. So it's, I was telling you the other day, Maya, that sometimes I feel as if I'm sitting inside of Filwa's beautiful constructs and looking at the world through this new body, and being somewhere else completely, really, in my other spirit. So being in diaspora has this feeling of living inside something that is not your actual habitat.
Yes, we discussed it, and we also discussed as a sense of anger, actually, that almost like, have we been fooled? I mean, in a way, especially after the explosion and after everything that's happened and the continuous corruption, everything that's happening in Lebanon, almost like we are rejecting or almost contesting that idea of these songs, or identifying with a certain image of
Absolutely.
This reality.
Absolutely. You said it as if we have been fooled because we believed in this dream. And we continue to believe in this dream, and we hope that we will be right.
Yeah, absolutely. Both Maha and Filwa and Sarah, to a certain extent, when you're collecting, there's this idea of reuse and recycling that exists as a material act. Now, how can we relate to this? Probably also to the symbolic cultural circulation, whether in fashion or whether talking about recycling or throughout. I mean, as an important component in addressing the climate emergency. Now, what's the culture? I mean, first, whether in fashion or in textile, what's the cultural significance of belonging? And where does the value reside? My question is to Filwa too. Does it? Yeah.
Well, I see this question really connected to the question before that. And, thinking about culture, I mean, we're at a time in Saudi right now where literally it seems like we are creating culture, creating a platform or infrastructure for culture. Although that would not be accurate because, culture always existed. It's part of how people live, how they eat, how they dress, and whatever creative outputs they put out there in the world. But the idea of recycling culture, I think it has always been there everywhere. We consume and we recycle culture all the time. And I relate it again to what Maha was saying about the habitat and where we live and what we consider home. At a certain point in my history, I felt that I need to seek culture elsewhere because I felt it was so hard to navigate, how do you say, a place for myself in Saudi at a time where things were very restricted and conservative for me to create culture or enjoy culture. And when I talk about this, I talk maybe specifically about the arts generally. So I thought I needed to go elsewhere to explore that. So there are different times, maybe in our lives and at different phases in our lifetime, where we seek culture in different places. And in that way, I see it also, we create several ways of habitat, of living, of mental kind of living for ourselves, and to attend to what you actually need at that phase of your life. And I think there's a lot of consuming of culture at that phase.
If I want to link it to the climate emergency we're finding in, with the climate crisis, obviously there is, and especially coming from a background in fashion and working extensively with textile, Filwa, can we say that that idea of fast fashion or going back now to upcycling and recycling and the circle, and talking extensively about the circular economy, is it linked directly to expressions of identity and maybe a fear of homogenization or assimilation? I mean, where does or also, I mean, to build into your research in Roger Caillois's work, do you feel that the sense of mimicry and camouflage that you identify in human behavior are positive? Is there a risk of big differences becoming elided or becoming lost?
To respond to the idea of the assimilation and conformity, and to what degree this state would be beneficial or not, as we were discussing the other day when we met, I think it's a matter of balance and discernment of each individual to realize to what extent they can assert their individuality while still, manage to be not isolated, manage to be part of a community as well, and to contribute to communities around them. So it's a matter of what experience the individual has in his own society as well. If you live in societies where it tries so hard to overpower or pushes the individual to conform to ways of being that do not align with the nature or the character of that person, I think that's also problematic. So it's really a matter of awareness and discernment. That's to address the idea of the Roger Caillois. But in matters of the fashion question and recycling, I think fabric or textile to be used as a sort of a cultural identity is very interesting, because we always kind of seek to identify ourselves with some part of our history. So whether that is a personal history or a collective history, it comes into play, and it becomes something that we look into. It becomes something that we research and we explore. So from that point of view, I think it has a relevance. And for artists in particular, I think it's an area, a great area of exploration as well.
Okay, I'm going to go back to this attention to details. Do you believe that attention to these small details around us in our daily habits and repetition or against repetition. I don't know. Can this attention keep differences alive, Maha, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that the big answer is yes, but it's basically the feeling that it is always at the personal level that we start discerning things. It is not at the global level. So if we want to get to the global, you really have to start with the personal. And to go back to your earlier question about recycling and reusing, I chose to use those sheets that go into the dryer somehow because I was collecting them without knowing what to do with them, but also because they are so thin and fragile, yet so resilient. I mean, they get into this dryer at temperatures that exceed 60 degrees Celsius and still come out intact. And it's a little bit like a lesson learned, like we could go through anything and still stay and still maintain our identity, still maintain our complete self. And somehow I wanted to show this in the work, that there is a power that we tap into when we are in a difficult situation or not in our normal daily life, and that this power exists and we just need to bring it out somehow. And
Yeah,
it's
if I could, I'm sorry, go for it.
yeah, just that to say, to link it back to
Yeah.
the personal or the private or the individual versus the global. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump on that thought as well, because Maya, you mentioned like recycling, and without my knowing, I think it took a few years for me and actually a few other people to realize it before myself, is that a lot of my work is of recyclable materials. So I started off with these wooden sculptures, and I would never buy wood myself. It would always be like natural cast-offs, and I would just go around collecting. And that's why I wanted to ask you, Maha, if that was like what was your decision in making and collecting those dryer sheets? Because for me it was more like, we have so much in this world, there's so much like excess that we can do so much with, and so I just wanted to make something out of things that were available. And I think that also goes into like the work that's showing and like my practice, me using paper that's found, like to recreate things that are on the sidewalk and so forth. So that was a nice connection between both of our works. What was the other question about the collecting?
We're asking about, no, I just asked about this attention to to these details, whether, I think also Maha was addressing the idea of going from the individual, from a rather than before going to the collective, as in terms of impacting. So it has to start with the personal first. So I was talking about this attention to these things. Can they keep differences alive? I mean, and what's the importance of that?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Like, it does start with the personal, and like with me specifically with the walks that I do, it is all about awareness. But then also, for me at least, I start to realize how much you're not in control of things. You can only start to like, you can only control what is currently in front of you. Like for me, a lot of those works were derived from images. So whatever I had taken a picture of is no longer there. And those are also forces that I cannot control: the weather, someone else's pace, and etc. So I just thought that's an interesting point to bring up in terms of like control and change within our immediate environments and beyond.
So how can the individual's urge to remember and sensitize relate to the collective experience? I mean, we're talking about difference between the personal and the collective experience of the environment. So is there a creative responsibility for the individual to connect their personal experience to the larger collective? And how can this connection lead to meaningful action? I mean, can it? And change, obviously.
That's a really big question, and it's a lot of responsibility to that as well. But from my side, I can just reiterate that it does start with the personal. Maybe it is about collecting and logging and archiving, and maybe that's all we can do at the moment. that can cause other people to notice what you notice and take that further in their fields and so forth. But one thing that is constant is change, good or bad. But it's the awareness of like the individuals, I think that matters the most. Yeah,
I think it
because
also
when we-
depends on the age, because when you're young, we want to change the world. So our personal, our individual action is keeping and is looking at how we can impact the collective. I don't know, Maha, what do you think? Is it now?
Well, I just hope that it will resonate in other people. I'm not that hopeful that it will change the world, but I really hope it resonates, and I think it does into other people, and other people may feel connected through this work, and they might start an introspection, or they already do that, and this will just be a way of acknowledging the same feeling or the same expression.
Yeah, I agree with Maha and Sarah. I think as artists, all we can do is, highlight certain issues, show the human experience of the environment around us, and ask questions. And beyond that, I don't know how much of a change we can, affect, but it's good to highlight it, and it's good to have the discussions about it, and possibly, someone else can take it, to other levels of action.
Filwa, you have spoken extensively about the way that cutting patterns and fashion is equivalent to the development of blueprints in architecture. I'm interested also in the different scales here. In clothing, we are dealing with how the individual body inhabits a space. With the building, it's about groups of people interacting in space. Again, so it's a creation of this unfamiliar cocoon-like environment that is in the fold. Is an intervention into how people relate to their bodies and to space?
Yes, I mean, not just this particular work, but this particular work has this aspect of interaction where a person is sort of invited to go into this cocoon and in that moment meditate on a state of self, and in that moment you are really aware of your body and where you are in that particular space. So it goes back to the idea of the body as a container, the space as a container, and it contains the part where I'm most interested in, which is exploration of our states of emotions, psychology, energies, because I truly believe, maybe because I'm sensitive to all of that, in my interaction with people, in stepping into a particular building and feeling that, I think this is something for me so interesting to find parallels between the body as a container and a particular room as a container, a particular, architectural space as a container, and relating all that to our human experience, relating it to particular memories, relating it to particular heritage, possibly, and this is how I've been navigating this theme through also different commissions that I've been working on in the last few years.
I'm going to go. Yeah, go ahead, Maha.
Yeah, during the exhibition of I Love You Urgently, Filwa, I went into one of into your installation. I inhabited it, and it really feels different. It really feels like you're looking at the world through a different person. You become somebody else somehow, because you are seeing without being seen, really. And when I was talking about this with Maya, I was telling her that it does feel the same when you change environments. So the environment can become this, the other culture, the different cultures that you go to through different changing environment, changing countries, changing cultures. They are a little bit like this shell that somehow change you and make you behave differently and also make you look differently to the outside world. So we sort of, I just want to ask, like, as if we always live with this rasha, with this textile that is translucent and that changes with the environment and allows you to interact differently with the different environments, so that basically a way of survival.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying, tell me your kind experience of my work. I always love to hear the feedback of how people experience the work, and if I succeeded in conveying something of what I was trying to explore. And you're 100% right. What you just described, I imagined that within a gallery space, or within that particular space where the work is residing, a person is stepping out from the collective, especially if it was an opening night or something like that. You're stepping out from a collective and going inside this, cocoon, and suddenly it's as if it became a little bit quieter. It's just you're there, just with yourself. And although you still might be hearing something or seeing through it somewhat, they can't really see you. And that experience gives you that enough distance for you in that moment to just be with yourself and create that almost a spiritual experience, even if it's just for a few seconds. So, so thank you for sharing that.
If I could just onto that, because we're talking about like distance and change and like the body as a container, and also like all these lenses that we're seeing the environment in. I don't know, I was just thinking like the term of like being an unlearner, if that's even a word, but it's something that I've been using or have come upon the last few months. And I think it's just really important to bring up because we're talking about all these different perspectives. Maybe the thing to do is to unlearn what we may know and to like relearn, whether it be our environment or your thoughts or your emotions. I think it just gives a whole new meaning to things. And that's like also something I try to do within these walks, is like to unlearn everything that I experienced that day, the day before, or the week before, to be able to step into like an environment anew. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that to the table, the virtual table.
I'm going to bring a little bit back into 2019, because we had two very different conversations between Filwa and Maha, and then I'll also explore more the experience that I had with you, Sarah. But remember, Filwa, when we're talking about 2019, when you started talking about I Love You Urgently, the exhibition about the climate crisis, 42139 Jeddah Arts. We struggle. I mean, actually, we struggled even with other artists from Saudi to really address this idea of the climate emergency. And I remember, Filwa, we discussed also the context of growing up, especially for you, growing up in Jeddah, in quite a conservative environment, but also this separation, this new relationship with the natural. Can you explore a little bit more that relationship with nature, and it could explain also why it was so challenging for artists to address the idea of the environment?
Absolutely. So when we first discussed, ideas for environmental issues and its relevance and sustainability at the time in 2019, I had to confess that it has not been an area that I really had too much knowledge about, or I read widely about or deeply about. And and I remember you shared a lot of reading materials at the time, and I also found it a little bit, I felt disconnected from it. So although these environmental issues and climate change has been in the news for quite some time now, and obviously I'm aware of what's happening in the world. It's not an area where I really got very curious about. And I had to think about the reasons for that. And I had to also, through my research for this project, to kind of to think deeply about my relationship with nature. And for me to create work, I have to have a very strong connection with the work. For me, I feel it gives my artwork so much power and impact if it comes from a place where I feel very connected to the ideas that I'm talking about. So in that case, I had to really, think about my relationship with nature. And it comes down to our history and the way we grew up and the environment where we grew up in Saudi at a time, pre all the changes that we are witnessing right now, pre the social reforms of late, where things were much more conservative, much more constricted. And you would think, what does that have to do with our relationship with nature? But ultimately, it's so connected because our comfort, first of all, in our bodies, our comfort in our social exchanges, whether in a public place or privately or between the sexes, we're very tricky and very charged and very sensitive. So it felt in so many ways to navigate to explore the natural landscapes of this country. Somehow it has been freed with the social reform that took place. Suddenly people are very interested in exploring, touristically, all the regions of Saudi, all the beautiful landscapes, south and west and east, and the desert and the sea. And I grew up in a beautiful city, Jeddah, by the sea. But even my relationship with the sea was somewhat complicated, swimming in the sea. Where do you swim in the sea? What are you going to be wearing to swim in the sea? So, all of that was part of it. So, so that explains my relationship to nature and how I, in the past few years, I've been healing my relationship to nature. First, from my travels, and now actually locally in my home, in my country, and I'm loving it.
I really found it fascinating. I mean, it's true. I mean, when we discussed it, it was almost like a aha moment. It's really because why is this younger generation not connected to what's happening in their environment, in the natural environment, and globally with that climate crisis? Sarah, your work has been, is your work a reflection of the rapid urbanization and the built environment of your city and your country? And how do you think that on a personal level, one can cope with this when you talked about taking charge and to preserve memory? So is this from your perspective, this urbanization sudden urbanization of the UAE that you lived? Because also your generation is always talking about changes that are happening continuously. And does it infuse your relationship with the environment?
It's definitely something that I notice. And I think the work is about change, but it's not about those fast-paced change. It's about slowing down a little bit. I think because so much is happening, I try to desensitize myself from so much that is happening around us and so quickly. And so I like to look at the smaller things, maybe are not so small, but that's how I see them. It's not about the city in general, because again, I just want to reiterate that I'm not looking specifically at a certain city or not, but more as space or place in an environmental setting. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about change or urbanization, oh yeah, go for it, sorry.
No, so do you relate to what Philo was saying? I mean, also growing up in the UAE?
Yeah, I mean there are many similarities between the UAE and Saudi. But I feel like my work is not it
Yeah.
doesn't tap into like social or like political issues as much. It's more like on a ground level and trying to make it a bit more personal.
Okay.
I just think it's too large for me to process.
All right.
Yeah.
Before I start, we have a few questions in the Q&A, but Maha, you were nodding and I felt you wanted to comment on Filwa. But also I wanted to link that conversation that you had early on when we also discussed the climate crisis. And for you, it was very, I mean, obviously this is part of your practice, but also these bins that was also that you showed like in clay that you did, like sculpture clays that were rebirthed, and also like a sign of protest, also to what's happening to the environment in Lebanon, but as a garbage crisis, that is an environmental crisis, but also a political crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was nodding because I'm fascinated by what Filwa was saying, because you know, we come from a very different background in Lebanon, where nature is our daily bread. We are also by the sea, but we experience it fully, and we can experience the mountains fully. And being deprived of that is very difficult. Like to be living in a country that has its own nature abundantly. I mean, I'm in Canada. It's a beautiful country, but it is also a different learning completely. Going back to the work of I Love You Urgently, my work was a series of clay, it's a models of garbage bins, because in Beirut, when there was the garbage crisis, the bins became like a symbol, because they would either put them on fire to get rid of the garbage that wasn't being picked up anymore, or turn them upside down as a protest and close the roads with them and burn tires and create like a really demonstrate in the streets because of the garbage and the political crisis. So the garbage starting to pile was a sign for what are we doing with the environment. I mean, we just collect things and throw them, and we never think what happens to these things. And when the crisis happened, we saw what happens. We had rivers that were aligned by huge bags of garbage. All along the river of Beirut, there was another river of garbage, and the mountains of garbage that we create, they become visible, and it creates a certain awareness. And this awareness, once you see it, it stays with you. And you have to remember that whatever you use is going to end up there. Unless you really are conscious about it at the individual level or at the collective level, it doesn't matter. But like this once was a jam jar, and I can drink water in it. It's not bad. I mean, nothing can happen. I don't have to buy a glass. And in my practice, in my practice, I also am, from a very long time ago, extremely conscious about the environmental aspect of architecture. And this is the part that is the most interesting to me in architecture, because it's one of the practices that can create the most damage to the planet, unfortunately. So being very careful can make a lot of improvement too. So you can look at it in the positive aspect. So we can really make a change and an impact.
That's very inspiring. Thanks. I'm going to actually read some of the questions that we're having in the Q&A. There is Ria Haddad. Filwa, your mothly insect almost looks like a burqa, the one worn in Afghanistan. I know you said there is a reference to Saudi national dress, but does the covering of bodies like the burqa does connect to the camouflage of insects you are depicting?
Well, this particular work have been read in many different ways. possibly, yes, I can see what she's seeing in it, that it's like the Afghani burqa. It's a place where you're almost hiding as well. It's a place of invisibility. So conceptually, it relates to that idea, but the actual burqa did not come into the designs or the line of the work. It was actually the dress, different parts of the dress of men and women.
Okay. Jeffrey Allen, this is a very thought-provoking discussion. Thank you, Jeffrey. Shukran jazilan. I have a clarification question for Sarah, Filwa, and Maha. Have I understood correctly that your perceptions, challenges, and struggles as creative artists are viewed through new lenses? Am I correct, therefore, to assume that this is tantamount to re-visualization and or the development of new forms of visualizations leading to a new form of personification? I love the examples cited within the context of the contemporary art world.
Maybe I
yeah.
wouldn't go that far. I mean, we're not, I personally wouldn't go that far. It's just an expression. It's a personal, I'm just a personal expression of a personal experience, I would say.
Okay. Anybody else? I think we need to wrap it up now. Thank you so much, everybody. Kate?
What a wonderful, rich conversation, ladies. Really interesting. Thank you, Maya. Thanks again to our artists for joining us today for the first of several conversations around perceptible rhythms, alternative temporalities. And if you're in DC, please stop by to see the show. We're located at 1763 N Street Northwest, and our gallery is open Mondays through Fridays from 10 to 5 p.m. It is a beautiful show and a testament to the incredible talent and creativity of artists from the Middle East. You can make an appointment on our site, mei.edu, or just walk in. And the exhibit is also available to view online. And stay tuned for future discussions. Thank you all again.